you can make sure that you're making the decisions that are best for your students and best for the college. So to quickly go through what you're going to see, the tool is the working budget. So you may, if you fiddle with budgets, you know there's a couple different versions. So the working budget is sort of the final budget. It's got revenue, which is just tuition and material fees associated with the program. And then from that financial information, that's combined with student information to create ratios such as aidable enrollment headcount to headcount capacity, average class size, and expenditures per FTE. And then the primary sources right now are from PeopleSoft Finance and PeopleSoft Campus Solutions. And then we'll talk a little bit about changing that to Workday in the future. So this is a screenshot of the tool that's very hard to see. But what it shows is the working budget here at the top and then the expenditures year to date. The prior year information, the 12-13 and 13-14 are final. The 14-15 is year to date. So it's where when you run the report, that's current information. Same goes for tuition and material fees. Then it shows you the number of sections offered. So this is where we're getting into Campus Solutions information. The number of credits offered, and then the credit capacity. And then you can see that these three items and a few other ones have stars. Those are designed to indicate items that are more within the control of program directors. Like, so for example, tuition is not starred because you can't really do anything about that, but you can, I mean, other than increasing enrollment, but you can't set the rate. But you can consider how many sections you're offering, how many credits are being taken through those sections. Then the ratio, this is where we start then calculating out more information. So we have the aidable enrollment count and the enrollment capacity, and then there's a ratio here of your aidable enrollment to capacity. And so you can see for these, you know, an anonymous program that they're about 71, 72%. You can see it's been declining, but very slightly over the last few years. Then you look at aidable enrollment count to number of sections offered. Again, then it calculates out a ratio. You can see that there's not a lot of change there for this program either. And then expenditures year to date and total class FTEs give you expenditures per FTE. And you can see that actually their expenditures per FTE has gone down pretty significantly. So then these are, by showing you these ratios, you get a little bit of a sense of where you would look for more information, what kinds of, you know, what is it that drove down the cost per FTE. Then you can see down here, there's a little, the last one is the total class FTEs, the FTE capacity, and then that ratio, which typically is fairly close to the headcount capacity information. So now that you have a sense of what the report is, how do you access it? You go into Cognos, you go in your program workspace, and then you go to the integrated budget. And I'm actually logged in as Zong, I think. Yeah. So it's super fancy. So if you click on integrated budget, this is where you can really get into the tool, and it's pretty amazing. It starts out at the college level, and overall, it gives you an overall picture. Then you can drill in by school, department, or program. And so if you start with school, it then pops out here so that you can choose your school, including regions. So we'll pick health. And so, so then you can see that it's telling you right here, it's sort of like a pivot table if you've ever done that in Excel, where it shows you here that you're in the School of Health Education, and then gives you the breakdown. If you're like, I don't care, you know, about the school, I want my department, you can get down to the department level. And so then you can say, well, I'm going to pick hospitality and explore all that same information at that department level. And then again, down to the program root. So this is where, to me, it gets very exciting, because you can really drill into the data and get a really strong understanding for your specific program. What do these numbers look like and how have they changed over time? And so you can see it defaults to the first one, but we can look at paralegal because that came up in the last session. And you get all that same information that we talked about before, but broken down to the program level. And one of the things that I learned in working with the deans and associate deans on this over the fall and spring, or fall and winter as we walked through it, was that this is a really good way to catch data quality problems. And so there were some that were caught as they were developing the report, where students weren't assigned to the proper program or to a program at all. But then we've also been able to catch other interesting things like programs that are assigned to the wrong school. And so we're working on cleaning that information up, and this is a really great way to identify some of that information. And so I highly recommend you go in, take a look, and start messing with it, because I think you'll really get to see some of the really interesting information about your program.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Just one note on this. From a program perspective, this is the financial field program and not the
Yes.
academic field of program.
That's a very important point. So this is an item that comes up a lot.
It's like subject. It's like the subject in people's off-campus solutions as opposed to the
Right.
6-digit program code.
Right. Yeah. And so that actually comes up a lot, and it's also not. It's by coding, not necessarily by what you would consider your program. So you might say like, well, my academic program is this degree credit program. And so this is the language that's associated with the coding, so with your subject areas. And so when you're looking through that information, know that it's pulling that based on the codes, not on necessarily what's your concept of a program. Does that make sense?
So how
You lost me.
Okay, so
I can go back.
the way, so all of the codes here, be it school, department, and program, it's all taken from the chart field associated with the class setup in PeopleSoft Campus Solutions. So each class should have a chart field on it saying, who's paying for this? Especially if it's got part-time instructors, it'll always have a chart field. Full-time instructors, that's kind of where we ran into situations where there was a lapse in necessarily in some of the data quality and record keeping because, they didn't need it to get through the payroll process. The chart field string, which I'm sure you're all familiar with the chart field strings. So we put a chart field on every class. So each class can only have one chart field. So someone had to make a decision as to this is the area that's maintaining it and running this class. And this is the budget it's coming out of. And so whoever paid for it gets the credit for it. So if it's, some class that's shared by a bunch of different programs like communication, written communication, that's a class there. One area put that up, paid for the instructor, et cetera, maintained it.
So that then they own it.
Right, so they own that class.
The English department owns.
Right.
Yep.
Right, so they owned that class and they owned the students that took that class. Those students may have been in 87 different programs across the college, but the person that ran the class gets the credit for it in this context. In a lot of areas, when you start getting into specialized courses and things like that, and especially if there's only one sort of program for a subject area, then this will kind of be true to your core curriculum analysis. But if you have a bunch of different programs in your subject area, it's not going to be quite as explicit as this is what CNA cost, that kind of thing. So I think there's some work efforts going on.
If you look at the numbers here, basically, if students take written comm and other gen ed type classes, isn't necessarily use financial.
Right. So it's a little bit different than trying to do a program cost. So that's just one caveat here.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
From the perspective of people at a more discrete level, just decentralized level.
Responsible for what you have to do for your program.
Yeah, what it's reflecting is what you're specifically doing.
What's your area of funding?
Yeah.
Are the only the degree courses in here for the program? Because when I go through, there are some 091 courses, so that it carries the program code, but they are not required for the degree. There was some, like we have a behavior class, but then there's some dog training being offered in detail or referred, but it has an 091, so it's a non-degree, but it carries an 091.
Oh, at the upper levels that you're looking at right here, this includes every class, this is using every class that was held during the year that had that chart field string on it for that program or that department.
Okay.
And then on the opposite side, same thing on the finance side, everything that the school department, et cetera, paid for out of their budget is captured on the finance side. So, is it perfect? No, and we can do some more drill down, but are limited at a certain level because of, there's a different granularity of record keeping on the finance side compared to the class side. So we pretty much only want to drill down on the things that we have a commonality on, which is pretty much the chart field piece. After we get past that, we start getting into some situations where you could have double counting and it gets a little messier. But at this point in time, you're really looking at what did you pay for on one side, be it non-degree or degree. And mostly on the finance side, we can't tell whether the, we know that we booked, $1 million in salaries or something. But we don't on the finance side have those salaries broken down into degree and non-degree, just based on the chart field, unless we happen to look out and it's like a contract class. And if it's a contract class, there's a project ID number there. We could trace that a little bit farther along. We could do some more discrete things with that. But generally speaking, on the finance side, there's no indication as to whether it was for degree or non-degree activity. Whereas on the campus solutions side, of course, we have the extreme course detail. We know what class it was, what kind of class it was, how it was held, where it was held, whether it was online or not. We have that, but we just don't have some of those metrics. So we can do some approximations at a high level to say, well, but we can't do some of the exact pieces aren't there. And we're looking at some of those things and different angles of looking at some of those things through other models.
And also, I just wanted to add that, you guys are aware that we're moving more and more towards like performance type of funding and things like that. And so, from the strategic standpoint, they are looking, upper management really wants to have data that's available not only on the students, because traditionally we've had a lot of data on the students, but not so much on the financial piece. And if you were running like a business, you would want to go ahead and know what your revenue sources are and how much you used up, and then any balance that you have. Okay, that's the typical business model that they have. And so more and more as we're getting funding cuts and things like that, they're moving more towards the pay for performance and things like that. We want to, as a school, also look strategically and empower at the lowest level so that you guys are aware. But for a program, here's what's happening with me in my, my area. And so we're trying to integrate more and more the student data with the financial data, with HR data, so that you get the big picture, okay? And that's where we're going. So hopefully, before we retire, Rona and I, in 15 years, that we will actually get there to that point where, as a program director, you'll have what's happening within your area. And if you don't have access to this and you feel that I need to have access to it and I need to go ahead and, yes, I will use it because we can build awesome things, but if no one uses it, it's worthless. So if you feel, yes, I'm going to be using it, you can go ahead and put in a work request to IRE. The current process, anyway, is to put in a work request to IRE, and then we'll go ahead and potentially ship that up so that Rona will provide access. IT will provide access to this particular spreadsheet for you. Otherwise, for the majority, they don't see this. Okay, so it's only if you should have access to it, and you're going to be doing things with it that access will be granted. So although it's in the program workspace, most people, they see
it.
Oh, you don't have access. I can't go anywhere beyond this. So you don't see this at all. Okay, does that make sense?
Well, and to give you an example of a place that, it's not a happy example, so I'm just but as we look long-term and we think about revenue shortfalls and the increasing reliance we have on state aid and the lack of ownership that we have over how much of that state aid we get, those are when we're going to start having long-term discussions about where we want to go as a college and what things are core to who we are. And so one way to get a better sense of just what's happening in your program, so where are we spending our money? Is that core to who we are? Or do we want to be spending our money in different ways? This tool allows you to start having those discussions at the local level so that next time it comes around and there's questions about, well, what do we want to continue doing? What do we want to stop doing? You can say, well, I know what's going on in my program, and here's the evidence that I'm going to use to support the decisions that I'm making. And I think that gives a lot of strength to arguments about why we should or shouldn't be doing certain things in a way that, I absolutely 100% always think that the qualitative, the story about the student who had great success through the program is extremely valuable. But what's even more valuable is you can say, well, our program is important. This specific one's critical to our mission. Here's the student that did so well, who's like our model, like the graphic design student that designed our beautiful logo. Like, here's our example of a student. But then here's also the supporting information. We've decreased the amount we've been spending per student. We've increased the number of students we've been serving. There's demand, going back to Zong's presentation earlier, there's demand out there for this. And so this is our, we have that story that brings you in, and then we have the data to close the deal. And so I think that this type of tool is what gives you that, is the beginning of. So like Rona said, there's some things that you're not going to be able to drill in as far as you would like to because of various reasons. But this gives you the first access to these kinds of conversations. And I think, coming from a different college where we did not have anything like this and we were in much worse financial position, this kind of tool would have been extremely valuable. And so I think the fact that we have it right now in advance of these discussions is critical. And I hope that people start using it and really getting the feel for it and bringing up, so like to go to my next slide, bringing up things that you see in it that are unclear or inaccurate or confusing. So one thing that when I was working through it and folks when we presented the deans and associate deans, they followed up with questions, what's included in here? And so I looked into it, found that in a couple cases, we had included the dean's office in the school-wide total, and in a few cases we didn't. So we need to make an adjustment because if you were trying to do a school-to-school comparison, right, that's not going to be the same. That's not apples to apples. I also got a lot of questions about materials fees. So why do materials fees, why are they calculated the way they are? How much do I get? How much control do I have over it? And you're like, material fees, you have no control and it's really confusing. But I do have it on my list of things to do to write up as brief as I can explanation of how materials fees work. But and so these are the kinds of questions that then we can get information to you so that then you can be making decisions that are beneficial to you as a program, because you don't want to spend a lot of time like focusing on how much material fees are if we can't change it. Like they are what they are, and I don't know if that's where we want to spend our political capital. And then we also, like I said, had an issue, I only found one, but where there was a program assigned to the School of Arts and Sciences that should have been an academic advancement. So then I'm working with, got it cleared with Terry and working with the hub to make sure that the program's assigned appropriately and that the budget associated with that program's moved over as well, because they were spending out of where the budget was. The budget was just in the wrong place. So that happens. And especially, as things have changed over time, there's, that our budgets historically carry over from year to year. And so if there's so we're compounding errors, right? So if something's in the wrong place the first year, it's might be even more wrong the second year, and we're adding on these additional errors. So when you find issues, or if you have questions as you use it, contacting Zong or contacting the budget office. And so Zong, you can contact through the work order process. For the budget office, our email address is budgetoffice@madisoncollege.edu. And you can just send any kind of question. We're never offended. So if you think that if you're like, this is completely, there's no way that any of this is true, just send it to us. We'll look into it and we'll figure out with you what the right answer is.
And this is the first time this data in this context has
ever
been scrutinized.
Yeah.
And it turns up a lot of business practice anomalies.
That just never came up before.
Yeah.
It's not, and we have the opportunity to correct it, so why not? And then, so on that note, talking to you about next steps. So we are working on continuous improvement of the report. It'll be updated at the end of the year once data is finalized so they give you the snapshot for how this year ended up, and then the new year will start. We'll incorporate data quality issues into the updates as much as they've been identified. And then we have to transition from getting the information out of PeopleSoft to getting it out of Workday. So that's some of the stuff we're working on in the near term. And so that's kind of a big thing, but we should be able to mimic the data that we received out of PeopleSoft.
So when you're going into Cognos and looking at that report, how accurate is it for year to accurate date type stuff, is it there?
It's all accurate, and
It's what's been posted so far.
yeah.
So there's usually a bit of a lag
Mhm.
between the time things are posted to finance and the time it comes through. And one thing to note about the year-to-date information is that we book FTEs, like we credit our FTEs to ourselves as soon as someone signs up for the class and starts taking it. Even if they may later drop and we not get credit, but I mean, it's what we know today about our best case scenario about who we have. On the fee side of things, on what our expenditure side, so we booked the FTE on January 1st when the person enrolled. But it's going to take, all summer long, all the way through until the end of the fiscal year for the instructors that taught that class to finish getting paid.
Mhm.
So there was about a $2 million difference on the one that you were showing.
Yeah.
And you were saying, oh, look, we're much lower right now, compared to some of the ratios previously. And part of that is because we still have to pay, the full-time instructors another, 6 or 7 paychecks. And, so that will not look nearly as rosy.
So that's why, well, that was part of the thinking there is you have $138,000 left. And part of it was the fact that, well, like you said, we're not
The year
paid
is,
yet.
the year is not done yet.
Yeah.
And so if you look at, so now, I guess the question I have, let's say somebody takes written count out of this, okay? Does that department then bill vet tech for that, or
No.
how is that? It doesn't, it's not like that.
Yes, there's no arrangement like
Yeah.
that.
It's just out of their total budget, it's not, written count isn't in the total budget for vet tech if they do it.
Right,
Is that correct?
exactly.
Yeah, and it goes.
So different programs have different, different, some program areas, exist for different purposes. And I think that's recognized by the administrators in the colleges, that, there are just some certain situations that these things apply to, and you have to just kind of think it through. So it is program as in the class, what you're paying for. Now, if vet tech bought or put up the class, let's say they wanted to run a special section of written communication, and they put the class up and paid for the instructor, then that will show up in their budget. And some of that kind of does happen sometimes, is that, an area will run classes and pay for those classes because the usual originating department may, for whatever reason, not have an interest in doing it, but they want to run something special or an addition or, whatever to meet their own special needs, and they may make those financial arrangements. And
So
in that
basically,
case,
like, we have a 1-credit college success class that we take, and I think we prearranged that, so it's probably something that would come out of our budget and usually for that area.
quite possibly, yes. So whoever's paying for the instructor or who listed their chart field on that class is.
So if college success if that wasn't engineered, it wasn't a class that they normally do, and we requested it, then it would come out of our budget.
Probably.
Yeah, possibly,
Yeah.
not
Well, that's
necessarily.
Right, it depends, it's not, yeah, it's more typical for you to have the originating department set it up and run it. But there are some special circumstances where, where areas do
They were
cross
gonna plan on it,
those
then we wanted
lines.
it.
Yeah, you just, and it depends. There are certain areas that, the curriculum is a little bit more flexible, a little bit more shared. And, and so each program area is got its own practices based on, its needs and its relationships with the other areas.
Yeah, and I know that in the asset has some good examples of where they have program areas that provide within their own college or within their own school support for other programs. And so for them, like, even though this program area is not producing the graduates, this program area needs to run in order to produce the graduates in all the other programs. And so for them, those would be broken out. And that might be not how intuitively they think about their operations, but that's how it's paid for.
There's a lot of subtext involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that this is where you guys need to maybe put on your a different gap, that is chart field. This is all your chart field stuff, okay? So whatever you see, if you guys are putting up the class and you're listing it under your, programs and the chart fields come to you, then you get the credits and you get the other stuff, okay? However, if it doesn't, it's not, your chart field's not in there, say, for example, arts and sciences puts it up and then, their chart field's there, then they get the credit,
But they're also paying.
But they're also paying for it, yeah.
Yeah.
And the same, and, you know, and so it goes both ways, so the tuition comes in too and gets credited to that program, but the expense is also credited to that program. And so if you do have any questions about a specific metric that you see up here, like I said, you can ask and we'll research it and tell you what exactly you're seeing and where it's coming from. You had a question?
I just had a question, because you have that tab up there on this revenue as material fees. Are those built in the college charges for those as built-in part of the tuition?
Material fees are mandatory by the state. So just like your program fee, which is, you know, X dollars per credit, material fees are also mandated by the state, and we have no control over them.
Yeah, so in that way, it is a lot
Okay,
like
so-
tuition.
Right. but
And it's
the student
required
doesn't-
for that course.
Because our courses don't have a separate
No,
materials fee, it's just all part of the tuition that they pay for that class.
yeah, I think the reason that they broke it out on this one is because the material fees are supposed to be related to, you know, the extra things required by a program to run. So if you looked at accounting, the material fees for accounting, generally speaking, are quite small, because they don't consume a lot of special equipment, and like, it's compared to, say, the welding program. There's different physical extras needed, as opposed to, so the way material fees work, the state looks at all the subject areas, instructional areas across the board, and they say, okay, we report in through our UFAS, we have state reporting that we do. And so the state looks
And
at how
so
much.
do all the other technical colleges, so it's,
So the state looks at how much we've spent on things, and they say, okay, this instructional area seems to have higher expenses in these categories. And so we want to charge an extra $20 per credit for this area so that they can cover these extra things that are required. Versus, say, if you just have lecture hours, then your material fee for your class is a flat $4. No matter how many credits, et cetera, it's just a flat $4. But if you are in one of the upper categories, then it's, for each credit, it's a certain amount times that credit. So it can run anywhere from $3 to a lot more. I haven't looked at the chart, the new chart this year, but yeah, you can, some areas, I think the material fees can almost, are getting up there, so they're almost, you know, rivaling tuition.
and then in terms of like, you know, when I talked about us not having a lot of control over it, that's where we report through UFAS, which is an acronym for stuff that doesn't matter. Uniform reporting. And so all of the technical colleges together report that information, and then it's through an analysis of that information that the material fees are derived. And so what that means is, even if we have a program where we spend a ton of materials, if every other college in the state doesn't spend very much, then the material fee will be lower than what we would, if you just calculated it for Madison College, what it would be. And vice versa, we may have programs where we run it very efficiently, we don't buy a lot for of consumable or other things for the course, but a lot of the other technical colleges aren't running it the same way, and so their expenses are much higher, and so then it pulls the fee up. And then, but the hope is that across all of the programs that balances out in a way, and then gives programs sufficient revenue to pay for those expenses. But it's not directly linked to your budget, which is where it's confusing.
I'm
So
gonna say, where's that cost?
just another, for troubleshooting and things like that too, this is actually at a very high level, broad level. And so if you guys ever have an issue, we can always go ahead and pull up additional reports that are not here, but that will, potentially help you to troubleshoot. So if you're just going, that just looks ridiculous, or
Like, yeah, there's
whatever.
no way,
Yeah, then we can go ahead and we could pull up additional reports, because all of this is actually, these reports are already developed and stuff like that, so underneath them are all of the data pieces that actually feed them, okay? So we can always look at that too in that particular way, okay?
All right. So there's also work going on to develop a similar report for grants and contracts. So that's another important piece that I mentioned at the beginning. So grant funded activities would not be part of this. This is for general fund operations. And so we're working on a similar report that would be for grant and contract funded courses. And then we're working on also the reports that Zong presented at the last to connect that performance funding to the activities by the schools. And so that's, pretty far along at this point. But so then that information combined with this information is really, I think, going to give you guys the space that you need to have these conversations about where you're utilizing your dollars and how that's impacting sort of the overall budget. We're fortunate that performance funding isn't going up to 100% of our state aid, so I think that that'll be good for us, but it is still a significant component of our budget, and it's something that we are reporting on, and thus anything that you report on becomes news potentially. So it's something that we do need to continue to take seriously, and that what Song presented on in this here will help us do that. So we've had questions throughout, but if you have other questions, or if you just want to chat about, I'm really grateful that Rona was here to be able to answer a lot of the specifics behind it. She is an outstanding resource for the college, and we're really grateful to have her. But if you have any other questions? Okay, great. All right, thanks, guys.